Hello, so glad that you're joining us today. We're going to be talking about differentiating instruction in an online classroom. I'm Katie Welch and wanted to tell you a little bit about myself before we get started. I have a PhD in linguistics and am currently serving as the past president of TextESOL 5, which is the Dallas-Fort Worth area TextESOL chapter. And have enjoyed doing that work. I am a teacher trainer and have been training teachers for a number of years. I have experience both in higher education and in K-12 environments. And actually, this past spring, when COVID-19 affected us all, I was supporting a teacher in a 5th and 6th grade dual language classroom in a local district, and also teaching in the higher ed environment. So I got to see how both of those contexts manage the change into online education. But I have been teaching online for over a decade and have created online course shells, have quite a bit of experience teaching in hybrid contexts, and of course have also taught face-to-face. So I'm excited to share my experiences with you today as we talk about differentiating. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my webcam, and so we can focus on our slides for today. If you were at TESOL International last year in Atlanta, you might remember seeing an installation like this near the front door. This was sponsored by Cambridge University Press and was part of a survey of language teachers about their experiences in the classroom. One question that was particularly interesting was the one that said, what is the most challenging aspect of your job? And the idea here was that you would take your string and loop it to your answer. This was based on a survey that had been done the previous year where these same or similar questions were asked. And interestingly, in the question of what are the most challenging aspects of your job, the answer managing mixed ability classes was the top response, edged out only by, well, excuse me, it was slightly higher than dealing with bad behavior, which of course, we know classroom management is always an issue. But it's interesting to me that managing mixed ability classes, where we have different types of learners in our classes all in one space, continues to be an issue. I would imagine that if we did another survey these days, post-COVID, that some of the most challenging aspects of our jobs have changed, but this one is likely still a constant. How do we manage mixed ability classes now in an online environment? And so today, this is the question that we're going to tackle. And I'm hoping to share with you some just practical ways that I have tackled this question in my own teaching, in the hopes that perhaps it gives you some ideas about your classroom as well. I wanted to thank Cambridge University Press for sponsoring our session today. Even though we're not going to be talking about Cambridge products, one of the wonderful things about Cambridge is that they really prioritize teacher professional development. And so, we just appreciate them asking these questions about what is challenging about our jobs and then giving us tools so that we can address those. When we talk about mixed ability classrooms, the term that comes to mind is differentiation. Differentiation is based on the work of Carol Ann Tomlinson. I've got a couple of her books here that she has written on the topic. And most of this work has come out of K-12 instruction. And this makes sense to me. About a year ago, I was observing a teacher of the year in a local district and got to sit in on her classroom for several days. And what I noticed, she was teaching 4th grade bilingual students, and just within her classroom of about 20 to 25 students, she had several newcomers who were brand new to the United States, beginning English speakers. She had all levels of proficiency of English in her classroom, actually, from beginning to advanced high. She had several children who were needing special education services. She had at least one child, possibly two, that were in the gifted program. She was doing all of her instruction in both English and Spanish. And it was amazing to me the mixed ability classroom that she was managing. And she did it so masterfully and so beautifully. And so it doesn't surprise me that a lot of this work comes out of K-12. But if you happen to be teaching in an adult environment, sometimes I think there's a tendency to think that we don't have as diverse of classrooms. Sure, we're going to have different native languages in our classrooms, but a lot of times our programs cluster together by proficiency level. So we might be teaching an intermediate class, for example, or we might even just be teaching one specific skill like grammar or writing. But yet we know, those of us who have taught in the adult world, that even in those types of environments, our students come with vastly different life experiences and skill sets. And so, so even though this work comes out of K-12, it's very relevant to teachers in with adult learners. So what is differentiation? So we want to talk about what it is and what it is not. So Carol Ann Tomlinson says, differentiation is simply a teacher attending to the learning needs of a particular student or small group of students, rather than teaching a class as though all individuals in it were basically alike. So what it is, it's attuning to the individual needs of students instead of a one-size-fits-all. What it's not is changing or watering down the curriculum or the student learning objectives. It doesn't mean that we are having different expectations for different students. One of the best metaphors for differentiation that I really appreciate is the idea of climbing a mountain. I have not been mountain climbing, not one of my hobbies. Perhaps that's something that you have done before. But anyone who's going to start out on the journey of climbing a mountain, someone who's more experienced may take a different path than someone who is not. It would take me significantly longer than it would take someone who's experienced mountain climber. But the whole idea is we're all going to the top. And so in your classroom, regardless of the ability levels of your students in a differentiated learning environment, your goal is to have the same objective for all students. Everyone's going to the top. We just we may take different paths to get there. And so as you can see in this picture, we've got, some take a windy path, some take a path straight up. And so every journey is going to look slightly different, but we're all heading towards the same goal. Now, along the way, we might need different supports depending on our background, our comfort level, etc. And so if you look at this picture, you'll notice that some hikers have some walking sticks. Some are wearing specialized shoes. Some have backpacks. For me, being not super athletic, I might take along some canned oxygen for the road to make sure I can reach the top. So different students need different types of supports. It's not a one-size-fits-all system, but we're all heading in the same place. So when we talk about differentiation, there's 3 different types. And so the first type is when you differentiate content. So the input, that is what students learn. This past semester, I was teaching an online college course, and I recognized that my students needed support in the area of library skills. We were doing some research. They didn't know how to use the library. But only some of my students were in that situation. Others were already skilled at library research. And so for that particular week of our online course, there was a differentiation in content. Some students did a library skills kind of introductory module, and then others did more in-depth kind of an extension activity where they could further refine their research skills. So this was differentiation in content, actually what was learned that week. We all learned how to use the library, but our path was slightly different. Second type of differentiation is in process. Process is how students go about making sense of ideas or information. So what they're learning is the same, but how they go about learning is different. In a linguistics course that I taught where I was training teachers in grammar and syntax, we were needing to identify and differentiate between 7 different sentence types. And we were looking at things like intransitive verbs and transitive verbs and linking verbs. And the first time I taught this content, I realized that quite a bit of percentage of my class were not with me. I thought I had taught it pretty well, but I did a check for understanding and realized, nope, we don't have it yet. And so based on that information, I knew I've got to come up with another path here. I've got to come up with some additional supports for my students. And so I came up with this little colorful chart, and I thought, I'm going to do this metaphor, and it's like we're going down the road in a car, and we stop for gas, and there's stop signs and yield signs, and Gus's auto garage, I think, is in there. And some of my students, they got this resource, this tool, and they said, aha, and they got it. But some of my students looked at this and said, this is too many colors, there's too many arrows, I can't follow this, I don't know what this is. I need another way to think about this information. And so I developed another tool, just a black and white, straight, read this question. If the answer is yes, you follow this arrow. If the answer is no, you follow this arrow. And it was interesting because some of my students said, oh, this is the tool that I need. And others said, oh, I hate this. I really liked the colorful thing with the cars and the metaphor. And so the idea here is we were all learning the same 7 sentence types, and ultimately they were going to take a certification exam that was going to test them in the same way on this information. But our process of understanding these ideas was different. It was differentiated based on the needs of the learner. And the third type of differentiating is a product, differentiation by product. And this is when students produce different output, that the way they demonstrate their learning is different. And so in my online courses, one of the ways that I do this is in a particular activity, I often give a choice between if you would like to contribute to our discussion board, our written discussion board, you can do it in that format. Or if you prefer, we have a video discussion board where you can use oral language instead to communicate your ideas. Now, using this depends on, if writing skills are something that you're needing to assess or not. But assuming that you just need to know what they've learned, do they have the content? Do they understand the information? And it doesn't really matter the modality if it's written or spoken, then this is a wonderful way to differentiate by product based on the needs and interest and comfort level, honestly, of your learners. Some learners feel very embarrassed by using a video discussion board, and others just eat it up. So today we're going to talk about the foundations of a differentiated classroom. If you want to differentiate either by process or product or content, what are some of the foundational things that you need to be able to do this, and specifically in an online environment? And so step 1 is going to be know your students. Step 2 is ensure student-centered instruction. And then step 3 is to plan flexible group configurations. So these are some foundational things that we want to be thinking about. Let's talk about step 1, which is know your students. This is kind of teaching 101 in some ways, so you may think, why mention it? But I think one of the things that I know as I've developed as a teacher over the year is that, yes, I would try to get to know my students, but I've realized that I needed to refine how I went about doing that. And so Carol Ann Tomlinson in her books gives this strategy, which I want to share with you for you to think about if this might work for you. She suggests getting an index card and writing a student's name on the front of the card, and also perhaps the pronunciation of their name, and perhaps even their preferred pronouns. So you have the information on who they are. And on the back of the card, she suggests writing down a wide range of information about the students. If we're going to customize or differentiate, then we need to know facts about who these students are that are in our classroom. And so some things that you might consider writing down are student interests. What do they like? What types of topics might you want to introduce into the class that would resonate with them? Any kind of proficiency level or assessment data that you might have. their school classification, their freshman, sophomore, first year, things like that. Any accommodations that they might need, and also their learning preferences. They might self-report this and say, this is the style of learning that I like. Or you might write things that you've observed about them, whether they tend to like to work in groups or individually, etc. Now, the thing that was radical to me about this was the writing it down. And that seems so basic, right? But what I want you to learn from my mistakes, I want to share an embarrassing story about myself. There was a semester a number of years ago now where I had a student who had narcolepsy. And she came to me the first day of class and she said, Dr. Welch, I just wanted you to know that this is an issue that I struggle with. And so I may fall asleep during your class. And I just wanted to make you aware. And, you know, I was younger then and thought that I had a pretty good memory. And so I didn't write this down. I just thought I would remember, you know, okay, yes, I'll make note of that. And so a few weeks get into the semester, I'm teaching over 100 students. And we get to the point where the university had asked us to give early alerts. So how are your students doing? And so I thought about this girl who often fell asleep in my class. And having completely forgot that she told me about the narcolepsy, I submitted an early alert for her and said, I'm concerned about this student. Well, somehow this information got forwarded onto the student. And she emailed me and she said, you know, I think maybe you forgot. And I, you know, facepalm, just realized how awful that I was calling her out for something that was a disability that she had disclosed to me that I had failed to document correctly in my own personal notes. And so I mentioned that to you to say, don't rely on your memory. You, especially in an online environment where you don't have face-to-face interactions to anchor information or to contextualize information about a student. I've taught so many online classes, I know that there's a tendency that students can just become a name on the screen. And so by documenting all of these different things that you know about the student, it can help you from that happening where it's just a name, or it can help you from an embarrassing situation where you forgot something important about the student. So when I talk with teachers about how do you know your students, these types of facts that you try to learn at the beginning of the semester, teachers always have wonderful icebreakers that they share. And I'm sure that you and your toolkit have a lot of icebreakers that have worked well for you in face-to-face environments. I wanted to tell you about one icebreaker that I have done beginning of the semester that has been especially effective in online environments. And that's the favorite word, selfie. So to get to know my students a little bit better, you know, you always have some way of wanting to do that. What I do is I give them a picture of myself. I'm the one up there with the word tenacity. And I tell them that this is my favorite word. And I have the selfie. And then I write 2 paragraphs about myself, introducing myself to the students. The first paragraph is just, you know, basic information, my education, my background, a little bit about my family, just stuff like that. But the second paragraph is about why I chose my favorite word. And I tell a little story about that when I was in elementary school, I really wanted a Wendy's Frosty, which is like an ice cream. And I just bugged my mom for one. And I didn't think she was going to pull over and go through the drive-through. But then she did. And instead of handing me the Frosty, when we got it, she pulled into a space in the parking lot and taught me the word tenacity. And she said, I did not want to give you this Frosty, but you demonstrated tenacity by asking. And so I want you to remember to always be tenacious. So I tell them that's why it's my favorite word. It reminds me of my mom. It reminds me of ice cream, which is something I like. And then I ask them to do likewise, to take a selfie with their favorite word and to introduce themselves to the class and tell us about themselves. So I put apples over my students' faces just for privacy's sake, but you see one of them has the word self-esteem, one has the word melody, one integrity, and the one at the bottom, it's kind of hard to read, has extrovert, which was very helpful in knowing something more about her. What in the online environment, these students haven't met each other before, but they share their words, and then we play Find Somebody Who. And so they read each other's submissions, they read each other's words, and they try to find somebody that they have something in common with. And then they comment on their post. And I have found that I've done this face-to-face where people just raise their hand and tell their favorite word, but especially doing it this way online where I provide a model of how to do it, I have found that students are much more willing to disclose things about themselves that really give me an insight into who they are as individuals, who they are as people. And it also fosters community as they get to know each other. I'll never forget the woman at the top that had self-esteem, talked about that that's her favorite word because it's something she struggled with. And these complete strangers, students who have never met each other before, read her post, and I mean, so many commented, many supportive things, and it really allowed us to create this beautiful community online right from the start in our class. So feel free, if you think that would work for you, to steal that idea. That's one way to know your students. Another way to know your students, though, is not just knowing facts about them and what they like and what they dislike and if they like music or if they're extroverts, although that's important. Another way to know your students is to do ongoing formative assessment. This is really important for differentiation. You want to make sure you are meeting the needs of your learners. It's important to know how they're doing in their journey to the top of the mountain. And if you need to make any adjustments for them, if they need the hiking boots or the walking sticks or the canned oxygen. And formative assessment is a way to do that. This can be formal or informal. This is, I think, one of the biggest challenges of teaching online, is finding ways to know how our students progressing in the content, in their learning, so that I, as the instructor, can make adjustments. So in online learning, we have synchronous and asynchronous. And so synchronous is when everybody's together online at the same time. This would be like your Zoom meetings and stuff. Whereas asynchronous is when people log in at different times to complete the learning. So I want to give you an example of how you might do formative assessment in a synchronous environment and how you might do it in an asynchronous. In synchronous environments, everyone's together, perhaps in a Zoom call or something similar. You can use a real-time poll to check in with your learners. This one, how are you feeling about the basics? And the information is we got 22% of our class is confused or catching on slowly, 11%, whereas 44% is loud and clear. For me to be able to differentiate for this classroom, I need to know this information that 44% got it, but 22% really don't. And so then I need to be following up with that 22% and thinking, okay, what additional scaffolds, what additional supports do they need to make it to the top of the mountain? And what do I need to do with those who are loud and clear currently in the meantime? If you're using Google Meet, Zoom, Canvas, any of the learning management systems, almost all of the ones that I have encountered will have this built in. I was using Canvas this past semester. They have a software where you can do real-time polls, and I was working with my 5th and 6th graders. We were reading a book together, and I wanted to see, are they understanding the book? I had provided some different instructional supports for them, but I needed to know, are they working? And so just during our live time together, I was able to put out some questions and they would just answer ABCD in the poll. And I knew I had that formative assessment data to know how I needed to plan the next piece of our online instruction based on that data. If you don't have a learning management system with a polling feature built in, then there's kind of third-party options. I've used Kahoot, which I love. If you happen to be using Cambridge curriculum in your class, Cambridge has many wonderful Kahoots aligned to all of their lessons. Kahoot just in general is awesome. Poll Everywhere is one that I've used, and that's what our example here is from. And one that I've seen recently, I wasn't familiar with it, but I've been in a couple of learning environments recently that use something called Mentimeter, and it also offers live polling in a variety of ways. So check those out, but make sure that you're doing some kind of formative assessment so that you can know your learners, not just the kind of static facts about them, like their learning styles or their assessment data, but the dynamic information about them, the ever-changing information about how they're progressing in your course. An asynchronous example is a low-stakes quiz or a low-stakes check for understanding during or after instruction. And so let's say that you are making videos, making lessons, recording yourself, teaching certain content, and it's asynchronous, so different students are logging in at a different time to watch this video. You always want to make sure that there's some kind of formative assessment before you release them to independent practice. One of the very best pieces of advice I was ever given before I created my first 100% online course, which now has been taken by over 1,000 students, and I'm so glad I got this advice, was that you always begin the week with a mid-week touch point where you've presented the instruction for the week, and then you give some kind of check for understanding, and that's due middle of the week. And then if you need to make any adjustments, if you need to follow up, if you need to reteach something, you know in the middle of the week that that's happening before you release the students to do their independent practice, which is then due at the end of the week. One way to accomplish this is to use Edpuzzle, which is one of my favorite apps. Edpuzzle, you can load your YouTube video. You don't have to own it. It can just be any YouTube video. You load it into Edpuzzle, and then you can set different points during the video where the video stops and a question pops up that students then answer. And so you can then check this data, again, middle of the week, and see, did they get it? Are they ready for the next thing? Who's not ready? Who may need some follow-up, some one-on-one, an individual conference or a small group conference? And you're able to use this knowledge of your students to then tailor your instruction for the rest of the week. Okay, so that's knowledge of students. The second thing that you need for a differentiated classroom is to ensure student-centered instruction. And so perhaps you're familiar with this contrast of the sage on the stage versus the guide on the side. And so again, these are face-to-face classrooms that we're looking at, but we see on Sage on the Stage this expert that's up at the front of the room teaching these vessels that need to be filled with knowledge. Whereas in the guide on the side, on the right-hand side of our screen, we see a different type of classroom. We see a lot of small groups. We see what looks like diverse groups, diverse in age, some of them. We see a teacher that seems to be facilitating, wandering around and checking in on different groups. And while we, in an online environment, we are not physically in these types of spaces, and we're not physically wandering around the room facilitating as we might, we want to take this ideology, this framework, and apply it into online contexts. We know we're in a student-centered classroom when student voice and student choice are evident. And so I want to focus for a second on the idea of student choice with something that I've used that has been especially effective in differentiating. And that is a choice board. That especially when you get to the product, the independent practice portion of the week, one of the ways that you can help different learners get to the top of the mountain is giving them a choice in how they demonstrate their learning. And so this would be a bingo style choice board where students are asked to get 5 in a row, including the free space if they so choose. Sometimes we see tic-tac-toe choice boards And you'll see that some of these different options are like include Flipgrid, which is a video discussion board, or taking a quiz. So you've got different types of ways to demonstrate knowledge about the same concept. And then another one that is helpful for ESL that might be interesting to you is instead of doing the bingo or the tic-tac-toe, you can have different columns with different domains. So listening, speaking, reading and writing, miscellaneous, and then you could say choose one in listening, choose one in speaking, choose one in reading, choose one in writing, choose one in miscellaneous. So the idea of a choice board is allowing students that opportunity to take perhaps their natural interests, the one that's the extrovert, you know, when you find out they're an extrovert because that's their word on their selfie, then as you're designing a choice board, you think about, okay, well, what would an extrovert, how might they like to demonstrate their learning? This past semester, when I was working with the 5th and 6th graders, we moved to online instruction. We did choice boards. And as I was thinking about some ideas for the choice board, we were reading a book together, and I thought I would love them to look at character development. And so one of the choices, I knew that I had some students in there that were very artistic, that they love doing arts. That was one of their electives that they were taking. And so we chose to do paper dolls. We cut out paper dolls, and then and of course I modeled for them how to cut out the paper dolls and showed them what the end product would look like. But then gave, as one of the choices, the option of making a paper doll for each of the characters in the book. And not everyone chose that because that really didn't speak to everyone. But for some of my students, that was a great way to differentiate in product, while others of them were much happier to write a one-page report about the different characters and some of the characteristics they had found in them. Okay, the final thing that we want to talk about is planning flexible group configurations. You have all this knowledge about your students. You're giving them choices, but how do you do groups in an online environment? So grouping is essential to differentiated learning. First of all, if you have students working in groups, then you know that you're more in the guide on the side part of the screen instead of the sage on the stage part of the screen. But it's not just having groups that's important, but it's giving a lot of thought to who is in each group that makes differentiated learning work, that provides the different pathways to the top of the mountain. So Tomlinson says, in a differentiated classroom, the teacher uses many different group configurations over time, and students experience many different working groups and arrangements. So in K-12 education, there is this concept called an elbow partner and an eyeball partner. Again, this is assuming a face-to-face classroom, but just imagine that you've got 4 desks together in kind of a table where you've got 2 students sitting next to each other and 2 more students sitting next to each other, and the partners are facing, the 2 pairs are facing. So you've got a cluster of 4. And so you have one person that is next to you and one person that's across from you. And so we call this, the person next to you is your elbow partner, and the person that's across from you is your eyeball partner because you're looking at them in the eyeballs. And so the idea is that when you are creating a seating plan for students, that you want to put their elbow partner, often the idea is you put their elbow partner, someone who would be a similar ability level on whatever particular topic that you're working on, and that your eyeball partner is someone who's more of a challenge, who's going to be a challenge partner to you, who may see the world a little bit differently, who may have a slightly different set of strengths and weaknesses than you do. And so the teacher can flexibly move between elbow partners and eyeball partners throughout the day, depending on what the objective is. The idea here is we can't do elbow partners and eyeball partners. First of all, that doesn't work well with adults because we don't do seating charts and stuff. And second of all, we're in online environments, so it wouldn't work anyway. But the principle is you want to be putting students in groups, many different types of groups, and you want to give a lot of thought to who they are with when they're working in groups. I have been so guilty over the years of just saying, just get with somebody, like letting students choose their own seats and then saying, just get in a group of 4 or 5, get in a group of 3, and not thinking about, or just saying, we're going to do a group project, let me know who you want to work with. As you know better, you do better. And that's one of those things that I've had to learn to do better over the years, because it is so much more effective if you are giving thought based on your knowledge of the students as to who should be in which group. When we talk about these groups, you'll talk about some homogeneous groups. So that would be like our top picture here, where all of the learners have some similarity. This could be based on assessment data. This could be based on interest. This could be based on native language. Somehow you have a homogeneous group. The bottom picture here would be your heterogeneous groups, where you are, or maybe your eyeball partners, where you're not coming at it from the same place, and that's going to strengthen the group because you're getting a variety of perspectives. Again, it's up to the teacher to figure out which of these configuration makes the most sense. And the idea is to not always use one or the other. In online environments, so asynchronous online environments, you have opportunities to create groups. If you're using Canvas or Blackboard as your learning management system, or Google Classroom, something similar, they almost always are going to have some way to create a group set. And I want to just encourage you, as you look towards having a differentiated classroom, to be careful with the option here that says just automatically split groups, split students into 4 groups or 5 groups, versus I'll create groups manually. There are some times where you just need a random partner, or you want to just leave it to fate as to who's going to be paired with who. But if you've gone through the steps of differentiation and you know your learners and you're putting a student-centered environment together, then the next step is to manually create those groups, thinking about the knowledge that you have and what types of learning environments different students are going to need. Again, I've been guilty of just doing it's so much easier if they just assign groups for me. But please consider the manual groups and then deciding, do I want a homogeneous group? Do I want a heterogeneous group? Why do I want that? If you're in a synchronous environment, then say you're using Zoom or something similar, many of those environments are going to have breakout rooms. So you can break up a Zoom chat into smaller breakout sessions. You can find instructions on how to do that. Many YouTube videos created to walk you through the technical side. But again, what I would encourage you to do is they're going to give you the option to automatically or manually assign who goes in which room. Please, if you can, resist the urge to do automatically, especially if you've gotten to know your students a little bit better, and think about who should be in which room. I have a 9-year-old son, and he was in an online camp last week, and they were doing Zooms and they used breakout rooms. And my son's a little bit more shy, and he was not contributing throughout this session. And the teacher I know had taken note of this and had tried to kind of bring him out, but he was just intimidated by all of these different faces. It was brand new class he had never been in before, so he hadn't met any of these other kids, and so he was real reluctant to share. Well, at the point that the teacher broke them down into small groups, the teacher had planned on putting 4 students in each group. And so he had said at the beginning, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have 4 in each group. But the teacher was clearly an expert in differentiation. because when it came time to break out into groups, he put my son with one other person in a two-person room. And my son said later, I don't know why he did that. I don't know why. He said they were going to be 4, and then I was in one with just 2. And all of a sudden, once he got into the room of 2, my son started talking. He opened up. He started learning. And I realized that this teacher, it was no mistake that he had put my son in this breakout room of 2. He was differentiating instruction based on the needs of his learners. He knew that my son needed a slightly different path to the top. And that path involved being in a much smaller, more intimate group where he would be more comfortable sharing. And so when he manually made those groups, he said, let's put this child in with just one other child. So this is the kind of thoughtfulness that we want it to give when we're using grouping in our synchronous environments. Okay, so today we've talked about 3 steps. And I just wonder, in which of these areas could you commit to making a change? Maybe it's knowing your students. Maybe you just need to write some stuff down, like I learned the hard way that I needed to. Maybe it's brainstorming some icebreakers that will work online. Or maybe it's thinking about how to use polling to find out how students are progressing in the content. Maybe you want to use a choice board and see how that works. If you're overwhelmed with the bingo that has like 20 choices, maybe start small with a tic-tac-toe instead. And then think about how you can A, have groups, and B, be very intentional about your group configurations. And think about where could you commit to making just a small change to move towards a more differentiated classroom in this fall. All right, we'll just want to see if you have any questions. Thank you so much for being here. I look forward to hearing what you think and anything that's working for you in differentiation or any questions that you have.